Let me tell you something that most people will never hear on the evening news. Wars do not start the way you think they do. You have been taught your whole life that wars begin with a gunshot, with an invasion, with some dramatic moment that changes everything overnight. But that is not how it actually works. If you go back and study every major conflict of the last 2 centuries, you will find the same pattern hiding underneath the surface. And that pattern has nothing to do with generals, missiles, or territorial ambitions. It has everything to do with money. Specifically, it has everything to do with what happens when the money stops working. I know that sounds abstract, so let me make it concrete for you. Right now, as you are watching this, the global economy is sitting on top of a debt pile that exceeds $315 trillion. That number is so enormous that your brain cannot actually process it, so let me put it another way. The entire world, every government, every corporation, every household combined, owes more than 3 times what the entire planet produces in a single year. The United States alone is borrowing roughly $1 trillion every 100 days just to keep the government functioning. China's economy, which was supposed to be the unstoppable engine of the 21st century, is deflating like a punctured balloon. And the trust that holds the entire global financial system together, the trust in the US dollar as the one currency that everyone can rely on, is cracking in ways that should genuinely frighten you. Now, I am not telling you this to scare you for the sake of it. I am telling you this because there is a pattern in history that repeats with almost mechanical regularity, and we are walking straight into it right now. The pattern is simple. When the financial system breaks, when debts become unpayable, currencies lose their value, and trade routes get weaponized, nations do not sit down and calmly negotiate their way out of it. They fight. They go to war. Not because their leaders are evil, although some of them certainly are, but because the math leaves them no other option. And the math right now, as we approach 2026, is pointing toward a convergence of financial pressures that looks almost identical to the conditions that preceded both World War I and World War II. So let me walk you through this, step by step, because I think you deserve to understand what is actually happening beneath the headlines. Let us start with a history lesson that will change the way you see the present. You were probably taught in school that World War I started because an archduke named Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo in 1914. That is technically true, but it is like saying a forest fire started because someone lit a match. The match is the trigger, sure, but the real question is, why was the entire forest ready to burn? And the answer to that question is financial. Here is what was really going on. Britain at the time was the center of the global financial system, the same way the United States is today. The pound sterling was the world's reserve currency. London was where all the big money flowed through. British banks financed trade on every continent. But underneath all that financial power, Britain was struggling. The empire was incredibly expensive to maintain. British factories were being outcompeted by a rising power that had newer technology, better engineering, and a much hungrier workforce. That rising power was Germany. Now, Germany had a problem. It could build the best products in the world, but the entire global financial system was designed by Britain for Britain. Access to capital, to trade routes, and to raw materials, all of it ran through London. Germany could not fully grow because the system itself was rigged to keep Britain on top. And instead of making room for Germany, Britain responded by tightening the financial screws even further. They restricted credit, controlled the gold supply, and built alliances designed to keep Germany boxed in economically. What happened next is the part that should make you pay very close attention. Germany's leaders eventually concluded that they would never be allowed to reach their full potential within a system controlled by their rival. They calculated that the slow economic suffocation they were experiencing was actually worse than the risk of war. So when the Archduke's assassination provided the excuse, the decision for war was not really a military decision at all. It was a financial decision. The ledgers started the war before the bullets did. Now I need you to see the parallel because it is staring us right in the face. Today, the United States is in Britain's position. The dollar is the global reserve currency. Wall Street is the center of everything. American financial power reaches into every corner of the planet. And just like Britain a century ago, America is an empire whose financial dominance is increasingly masking a weakening productive base, an economy that makes its money from money rather than from actually building things. And China is in Germany's position. It is the rising industrial power with the best factories, the most ambitious projects, and a deep resentment of a global system that it sees as designed to keep it permanently in second place. The technology bans, the semiconductor restrictions, the financial pressure campaigns that Washington has been escalating for years, these are the modern version of what Britain did to Germany. So the question that you and I need to sit with is whether China's leaders will eventually reach the same conclusion that Germany's leaders reached in 1914. That is the question that keeps serious strategists awake at night, and honestly, it should keep you awake too. But the historical parallel is only part of the story. Let me tell you about the specific financial time bomb that makes 2026 so dangerous, because this part is pure math, and math does not care about your feelings or mine. During the pandemic in 2020 and 2021, something extraordinary happened. Governments and central banks around the world flooded the system with more free money than at any point in human history. Interest rates were pushed to basically zero, trillions of dollars were printed out of thin air, and corporations, quite rationally, rushed to borrow as much of this free money as they possibly could. They issued bonds, took out loans, and leveraged themselves to the hilt, because when money costs nothing, you would be foolish not to borrow it. Here is the critical detail that almost nobody is talking about. Most of that borrowing was done with 5-year maturities. The companies locked in those 0% rates for 5 years. Now do the math with me. 2021 plus 5 equals 2026. Starting in 2026, a massive wall of corporate and government debt is going to come due all at once. Trillions of dollars in loans will need to be refinanced. But here's the thing, they will not be refinancing at 0%. Interest rates are now 5, 6, 7%. That means a company that was paying essentially nothing on its debt will suddenly see its interest payments double or triple, literally overnight. Think about what that means. Thousands of companies that have only survived because debt was free, companies that are already barely profitable, are going to face instant insolvency. They simply cannot afford to pay 3 times what they were paying before, so they will default. And when they default, the banks that lent them the money take massive losses. And when the banks take massive losses, they stop lending to everyone else. And when lending freezes, the entire real economy, which runs on credit the way your body runs on blood, starts shutting down. Unemployment spikes, spending collapses, and tax revenues crater just when governments need money the most. At that point, the central banks will have to make an impossible choice. Option 1 is to let the whole thing collapse into a full-blown depression, which means millions of people losing their homes, their jobs, and their savings. Option 2 is to fire up the printing presses again and create trillions of new dollars to bail everyone out, which means unleashing inflation that eats away at the value of every dollar you have in your pocket. And I can tell you right now which option they will choose, because they have always chosen the same one throughout history. They will print. But this time, the printing will happen in a world where supply chains are broken, where nations do not trust each other, and where the global trading system is splitting into hostile camps. The result will not be a manageable inflation. It will be a currency crisis. And this brings me to something that I think is the most underreported story of our time. The United States has turned the dollar into a weapon, and the consequences of that decision are going to shape the next decade of human history. For most of the modern era, the dollar was like a public utility. It was the shared infrastructure of global commerce. Every country used it, not because they loved America, but because the dollar was reliable and neutral. It did not matter if you were an ally or a rival of the United States. Your dollars were your dollars, and nobody could take them away from you. That changed in 2022. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the United States and its allies froze roughly $300 billion in Russian central bank reserves. Overnight, with no trial, no legal proceeding, and no international adjudication, an entire nation's sovereign savings were made inaccessible by executive decision. Now, you might think that was justified given what Russia did, and maybe you are right. But I need you to understand the message that every other country in the world received that day. The message was this: your money is safe in the dollar system until Washington decides it is not. Put yourself in the shoes of a Chinese official who manages $3 trillion in foreign reserves. You watched what happened to Russia, and you realized that if a crisis over Taiwan or the South China Sea ever pushes Washington too far, your country's entire savings could be wiped out with a keystroke. Or put yourself in the shoes of a Saudi prince. You have been pricing oil in dollars for 50 years, and now you have to wonder whether those dollar holdings might be used against you someday if your politics stop aligning with Washington's interests. The reaction has been quiet but massive. China has been building an entirely separate payment system called CIPS to move money without touching the dollar. Russia is trading oil in rubles and yuan instead of dollars. Central banks all over the world have been buying physical gold at a pace not seen since the 1940s. The BRICS nations are actively working on alternatives to dollar-based trade. None of this has replaced the dollar yet, but what it is doing is building the infrastructure for a world where the dollar is no longer the only game in town. And here is why that matters for the question of war. When every country shares the same financial system, war is economic suicide, because it destroys the shared infrastructure that everyone depends on. But when countries have built their own separate systems, when they have reduced their exposure to each other's currencies, and when they have stockpiled gold and created sanction-proof payment networks, the economic cost of going to war drops dramatically. The financial ties that used to bind rivals together in mutual dependence are being cut, one by one, and every tie that gets cut makes the next step toward conflict a little bit easier. Now let me talk about China specifically, because what is happening inside China right now is one of the most dangerous dynamics in the world, and almost nobody is giving it the attention it deserves. There is a concept in geopolitics called the peaking power trap. It describes what happens when a rising country realizes that its rise has peaked, that it will never be stronger relative to its rivals than it is right at this moment, and that from here on out, it is all downhill. The psychological effect of that realization on a nation's leadership is incredibly dangerous, because it creates an overwhelming urge to act now, to grab whatever you can while you still have the strength to do it, before the window closes forever. China in 2026 fits this description almost perfectly. The Chinese economic miracle was built on three things: a huge and growing labor force, an export-driven manufacturing machine, and a massive real estate boom. All three of those pillars are crumbling. China's population is shrinking at a rate that demographers have never seen in a major country during peacetime. The one-child policy created a demographic catastrophe that is now unfolding in slow motion. The workforce is contracting, the population is aging rapidly, and the social safety net cannot handle the burden. The export model is under attack from Western technology restrictions and supply chain reshoring. And the real estate sector, which at its peak represented about 30% of China's entire economy, has essentially collapsed. Major developers have defaulted, property values have cratered, and millions of ordinary Chinese people who put their life savings into apartments that were never finished are watching their wealth disappear. For the Chinese Communist Party, this is an existential crisis. Their entire claim to power rests on one promise: we will make you prosperous. If they cannot deliver prosperity, they need another source of legitimacy, and throughout history, the most reliable alternative has been nationalism. Taking Taiwan is not just a strategic ambition for Beijing, it is the unfinished business of the Chinese Civil War, a symbol of national humiliation that the party has promised to resolve for decades. And on top of that, Taiwan produces the vast majority of the world's most advanced semiconductors. Controlling Taiwan would give China a chokehold on the global technology supply chain that no amount of sanctions could overcome. Multiple military analysts, including former commanders of the U.S. Indo-Pacific forces, have pointed to 2026 as a potential window for Chinese action against Taiwan. The logic is straightforward. By 2026, China's naval buildup will be near its peak relative to American and Allied forces in the Pacific. Meanwhile, the U.S. military modernization programs that were accelerated in response to the Chinese buildup will not yet be fully operational. If China waits too long, the balance shifts against them. If they move too soon, they face a stronger opponent. 2026 sits right in the middle, in what strategists call the window of maximum temptation. There is one more piece of this puzzle that I need you to understand, and in some ways it is the most important piece of all. It is about what happens inside countries when the money fails. Right now, in the United States, in Europe, and in China, the gap between the wealthy and everyone else is wider than it has been at any point since the 1920s. The middle class in America has been hollowed out by decades of stagnant wages, rising costs, and an economic system that has funneled wealth upward while leaving ordinary people behind. Young people in China cannot find jobs. People across Europe are watching their living standards erode year after year. There is a deep, simmering anger in all of these societies, and right now, the only thing keeping that anger from boiling over is the thin remaining illusion of economic normalcy. When the financial crisis of 2026 arrives and that illusion shatters, when people watch their savings vanish, their jobs disappear, and their futures collapse, that anger is going to explode. And history tells us very clearly what happens next. The anger can go in one of two directions. It can be directed inward, at the ruling class, which means revolution. Or it can be directed outward, at a foreign enemy, which means war. For the people in power, the choice is obvious. A revolution means they lose everything. A war means emergency powers, censorship justified by national security, government control of the economy, and a population united against a common enemy instead of united against them. This is exactly what happened in the 1930s. The Great Depression did not lead directly to World War II. It led to war through the intermediate step of political radicalization. Economic despair fueled fascism in Europe and militarism in Asia. The financial crisis created the political conditions that made war possible, and then the leaders who rode the wave of popular anger made the decisions that made war inevitable. I am not saying 2026 will unfold in exactly the same way, but I am telling you that the same ingredients are present, and the recipe has not changed. So where does all of this leave you? Let me be honest with you. I cannot tell you with certainty that a financial collapse in 2026 will lead to a world war. Nobody can predict the future with that kind of precision, and anyone who claims they can is lying to you. What I can tell you is that the conditions that have historically preceded great power conflicts are assembling themselves right now with remarkable speed. The debt is real. The fracturing of the global financial system is real. China's desperation is real. The domestic anger in every major power is real. These are not theories or speculation. They are measurable, documented realities. The purpose of understanding all of this is not to panic. Panic is useless. The purpose is to prepare. In practical terms, that means understanding that in a world where currencies can be debased overnight, where bank accounts can be frozen by government decree, where stock markets can crash and stay crashed for years, paper wealth is fragile. The people who survived the financial upheavals of the 20th century were not the ones with the biggest portfolios. They were the ones who held real, tangible things: land, gold, commodities, practical skills that other people needed. That lesson has not changed. But preparation is also mental. It means accepting that the stability we have enjoyed for the past 80 years is not the default state of the world. It is an exception, a lucky stretch made possible by a specific set of financial and geopolitical arrangements that are now coming apart. Empires rise, borrow too much, overextend, fracture, and then fight. That is the rhythm of history, not because people are inherently destructive, but because the financial systems that hold civilizations together are inherently fragile. And when they break, the incentives shift from cooperation to conflict faster than anyone expects. The year 2026 is just a number on a calendar, but the forces converging on it are not abstract. They are as concrete as the debt payments that will come due, as measurable as the gold being stockpiled in central bank vaults, as visible as the warships being built in Chinese shipyards. The drumbeat of financial crisis and the drumbeat of war have always marched in time with each other, and right now they are picking up speed. I am not telling you the sky is falling. I am telling you to look up. Pay attention to the bond markets. Pay attention to the debt. Pay attention to the alliances being formed and the financial systems being built in parallel. The information is all there if you are willing to see it, and if you see it early enough, you do not have to be afraid. You just have to be ready. History does not repeat itself exactly, but it echoes. And the echo that is building right now sounds an awful lot like the ones that came before the great catastrophes of the last century. Listen carefully. The convergence is coming.